Hello and welcome. My name is Efrain Toro, Efrain Toro. And I just want to say, before anything, thank you to 𝗟𝗩 𝗦𝗧𝗢𝗥𝗓, the keeper of the big picture. Jules and Jerry and the rest of the guys, Derek, Akbar, Scott, for getting me here. We are here. I have my new box. I have a place to speak. I have some friends, students to talk to and to share ideas with. And so life is complete. I need to start. I'm going to change the camera for a little bit. Okay. So you see more of who I am. I'm going to start by telling you that I was born in a little house in a farm at the outskirts of a little town called Cabo Rojo in Puerto Rico. It's in the southwest. It's a little town. Big family, 12 uncles and aunts by one side and 50 on the other. On one side, they're all professionals, people that grew up in a farm, but had a really tough mom, my grandmother, who was Jewish, and she never went to high school, and she had her own business of pastries and cheese, goat cheese and cow milk cheese aged in plantain leaves. Oh, that with guava paste, mango paste, pineapple paste, and all the rest, papaya. Unbelievable. People from all over the island used to come to the farm to buy her products. And so I remember that. Later, much later, maybe 7, 8 years later, 11, 12, I'm in the farm. I was working on that factory, helping one of my uncles. But the thing is that my uncles, who are farmers, are in touch with this basic idea of living, of growing up things to eat, not going somewhere to buy them. Because my grandmother had everything. It had goats, it had oxes, it had cows, it had everything. And her kitchen was out to where she had the tomatoes and all the stuff for salads. She was an amazing cook, but she was very strict and very disciplined. And so all the kids had to study. And they studied hard. Most of them became engineers, 5 lawyers, mostly all mathematicians. On my mother's side is the opposite. There were mostly girls, like 13 girls and 2 boys. and they were, into music, into singing, and all that kind of stuff. My father and my uncles loved music, but none of them could dance or sing. And my mom and all her family were exactly the opposite. So that's where I come from. You see, I come from that math idea, and I come from that dancing and singing idea. So I'm lucky. I'm so lucky. I had everything. I had all that stuff. That is my formation, and that's where I come from. So I can dance, I don't sing very well, and I can play groove, but I wanted to know what it was. And that took me into educating myself, because a lot of the things that I figure out, that I found out, I did it by myself. I had no teachers, and the teachers that I asked them along the way, they, always look at me. Well, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. It was that kind of stuff. So about that stuff, nobody knew what I was talking about. I've written 18 books. My latest, it's called Rhythm in Essence. So as you can see, I've started at the beginning and I'm already at the end. So I'm backwards. Yeah, there you go. I'm backwards. I'm left-handed. I started from the end to the beginning. So this idea you just saw on the screen, I developed in Australia over a year ago, and that's going back to the beginning. See, from the end, I'm going back to the beginning right away. I started dancing, yeah, then dancing and singing, and then playing, yeah, and then questioning. And that book is my third book on the topic of rhythm itself. Okay. Now, I went back to movement. Yeah, I'm a little kid, 4, 5, 6 years old. I'm dancing with my mom and my aunts, and I go to dances and I dance with girls that are up there, and I'm just dancing, And so I am moved by the music, and I can dance fairly well at that time because my sense of timing was good. It was, or my dad couldn't do that. He did have a good sense of time, which people call rhythm. And as you can see, I'm making a separation between time and rhythm. They're really not the same thing. One is an element of the other. So I explain in a very simple way, with a lot of graphics on this project, these beginnings of movement. But now I'm adding to it a little bit of consciousness. The consciousness is counting, 1, 2, 1, and 1, and 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's very basic, simple stuff that in the first group of that series in the book, it's dedicated from 1 to 3. Okay, 1 pulse, 2 pulses, 3 pulses. So I also, did this movement sequences on video. I not just explained them in the book with graphics, but I moved to them. Okay, and moving is a little different than dancing. Okay, as a good friend of mine and student, and keeps me on my toes. It's a fantastic happening dude. 𝗟𝗩 𝗦𝗧𝗢𝗥𝗓 in England, he brought up the fact that movement is universal, like rhythm, and that, when we denominate movement as dance, we are talking about a prejudiced idea, because a certain movement that we call it a dance has a cultural implication. So it belongs to a kind of culture. I mean, not a kind of culture, it belongs to a culture, but it belongs to a certain kind of people in music. So there are things in movement that are universal. You know, the way you move, to walk, and that kind of stuff. But we do that naturally. So that's the end of where I am right now. Not the end, but where we are actually right now. And that book, in that series of videos, it takes me back to the beginning, my upbringing, which is moving and dancing. And playing, you know, at Christmas, and playing the little drum, tambora, tico, tico, ding, 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 ding. You know, and that kind of music is aguinaldos, and they come from villancicos and aguinaldos. They come from the south of Spain. The flamencos and the Spanish people that came with Columbus. They brought that music. And in Puerto Rico, that is especially very popular during Christmas still. But when I was growing up, it's everywhere all the time. I also was able, at a really early age, to see, to watch, to go hear people play, because we moved to a little town, to another town where my dad was a math professor at the university. And in that neighborhood, a block away from where I was, there was a radio station. And I used to see these people play in the weekends. And they played waltzes and polkas. You know? And they played a form of musical bolero, which is tientos in flamenco. And we forget, or we don't know, you know, before there was Caribbean music, there was Spanish music. And the Spanish people came this way. And they brought, you know, the Jewish people and the Arabs and North Africans and blacks, and they brought a bunch of different people, you know, in those boats, because the Catholics were doing, you know, heavy things to all these cultures. They wouldn't submit to the, you know, to the church. So I don't think the story is very clear yet, but what's clear is that flamenco in Spanish music, Jewish, Arab, North African style music, was coming to the Caribbean. And that it was here a few hundred years, you know, before anything else. Okay. Before jazz and blues and all that kind of stuff, there was flamenco and there was Spanish and Portuguese culture in this side of the world. I grew up playing that music, lucky, but I also grew up listening to classical music that my dad used to listen to. I remember, you know, the constancy of Segovia and Montoya, which were the greatest guitar players of the time. My dad had a guitar, but he tried to play melodies. He had no rhythm. I made a one-string guitar, and he thought I was really into guitar, so he bought me a guitar, and I played left-handed, and very weird. And so I am somehow backwards. When I see a right-handed player, it looks good. When I see a left-handed guitar player or drummer or whatever, it looks backwards. I am that, 𝗟𝗡 is the name or the adjective. So when I started trying to play the guitar, I copied this natural musicians, what they play. And that was my first encounter with rhythm. Because they played a rhythm that sounded one way or sounded a different way, even though you were playing the same thing. So, pa, raqueto, pita, raqueto, pita, raqueto, pita, ta, raquito, pita, raquito, pita, raquito, pita. So, I thought there's something weird about this, but I love the pattern. Sometimes it sounded like this, and sometimes it sounded like that. That's too little to investigate, isn't it? Toss. I just mentioned your name, Toss. We must do a show about cooking and playing, this dog and stuff. And so that first encounter with rhythm was very real. I never forget that. And it bothered me, but I kept at it. I couldn't play guitar. So when I was 12, I got it earlier, 10, 11, 12, around that area. Not really certain. But I got a drum set, and a week later, I was playing and making money. And I've been playing since then, since I was 12, that I remember for sure. I'm making $2.50. That's a lot of money. That's in 1966 or so. I always played, and I remember when I started playing, I got to listen to great music, which later, a few, 15, 20 years later, I'm recording with a lot of these people I grew up listening to. It's been an amazing thing that I find myself, recording with Chicago, and I love Chicago. I find myself with Three Dog Night, for example. Why, I find myself with Jefferson Airplane, the original people, in the studio. And wow, and I could go on and on and on. Okay, and so I'm so lucky. So I get to play drum set for a couple of years. Then I think I got bored with the whole thing, and I went into percussion. I bought bongos, I bought congas, timbales, and at that time, a percussionist just played one instrument. I bought all of them. I wanted to play all of them. And so I used to invite people and put a record player, and we put headphones or put the music very loud, and the three of us would play the records, of Ray Barretto and people like that. My biggest influence in that kind of Latin Afro-Caribbean music, which is born really in New York, and later they call salsa. It starts, with the guitar players that come from Spain, and the blacks take the guitars, and those guitars don't sound Spanish anymore, they sound black, and that's different. That develops beautifully all over, South America, especially, Peru. And then in the Caribbean, we have a son montuno, which is developed in Cuba. But we have that in the the Dominican Republic and in Puerto Rico, was developed the same. You know, great artists. You know, I remember listening when I was little, Benny Morel, because I had an uncle, this guy, an Arab guy that married one of my mom's sisters. She was gorgeous, and he was a TV and radio personality. He used to have 2 radio stations. He owns the biggest collection of tango music in the world. I was so lucky because I watched those movies, listened to that music when I was little. He used to be a promoter, so I met Tito Puente and a lot of people when I was a little kid. I was aware of that level of performance, but my greatest influence on that period was 𝗟𝗑 𝗦𝗧𝗢𝗥𝗢. Something about how he gave himself to the performance, he gave himself, that other people didn't have that. And I copied that. And so since I'm very young, I'm very committed to a performance. So when I perform, you know, a lot of people that get scared. You know, I'm really into it. And not that I'm serious, because I'm always laughing and smiling and communicating with the public when I play live. But for me, I remember that feeling I got from playing to 𝗟𝗑 𗦦𝗧𝗢𝗥𝗢 records. The first time I saw 𝗟𝗑 𗦦𝗧𝗢𝗥𝗢, I was 17 years old. My knees were trembling. I couldn't say. When he played, the earth moved for me. So it's a big influence, huge influence. He was so modern, yet so traditional. In those 2 ideas, for me, that's heaven. So how to be modern from tradition? It's what all my books are about. Okay, the essence of the whole idea is rhythm, and how you commit to the rhythm, to the pulse of it. You commit to it fully, and you can see, then you can see more. Okay, but you have to give up. You know, when you surf, I've been surfing 55 years. I'm 65 years old now. This has been my best surfing season ever. 65, unbelievable. And surfing is a very demanding sport, so I'm very lucky on that. But when you commit to a wave, you just let that thing carry you, you know, and then move along with the contour. And music is exactly the same thing, exactly the same thing. And so, listen to the music, see how it moves you, and go with it. That is sensitivity to music. So for me, that's what a real musician is. And it's always been since I've started studying. And from that 𝗟𝗑 𗦦𝗧𝗢𝗥𝗢 idea is that you just commit to this act, to this groove. And it's amazing what happens, you know. It's amazing what happens. The energy you get, because it's a non-stop flowing energy. It's like you don't get tired because you're doing this thing that is so much fun. In education does the same thing for me. I come from a family of educators on my father's side. My father was a math professor. Many of my uncles were professors. And these 2 things always go hand in hand for me. Okay? So when I was about 17, 18, I think you have a picture of that, Jules. Yeah. See, those congas that the guy is playing, that timbale player is me. And that bongo, which is below that guy playing the güiro, that bongo case, that's an LP bongo from that time. Okay, Later after that, maybe, or that same year, where I sold those congas to the guy, I bought that first LP fiberglass conga. It was advertised in a Latin music magazine, and I saw it, and there was nowhere to buy them. And my mom helped me write a letter to Martin Cohen, and he answered me because it was an ad on this ad in the magazine. So we had the address. Martin answered and sold me the instrument. So I bought then LP timbales, the LP conga, and I had the bongos already I bought in Puerto Rico. That year, I went to university, and I started studying theory and listening to this Norton series with Leonard Bernstein. It was fantastic. In that whole series, and learning how to read music and learning scales, the major, minor scales, and variations of them, and learning how to play a little bit of this and that. There was no drum teacher, so I took a little bit of the piano, did that from scratch with a teacher there, and I started playing trombone. I love trombone. I love Barry Rogers, and with Eddie Palmieri and Jose Rodriguez, and that guy. I just love that instrument, and I ended up playing with some of the best trombone players in the United States. A few years later, it's so weird. In university, I really committed myself to learning this Western ideas about music, and it was fun because there was not, in a way, now I can see it was fun. There was no drum teacher, and later, when I got my first drum teacher, things became very different because it became the system of things that we do in a point of view of rhythm that I didn't quite agree with. I come from from dancing and singing and playing this very simple stuff. And none of that stuff seems to be present in this new way of education I'm getting from highly skilled professors, the best at that time. I started with Fred Buda and Frank Epstein and became good friends with Rick Frith. I'm still in touch with Frank Epstein, who's a magnificent classical musician of the highest caliber, world class, and educated. But their point of view does not gel with my point of view. But I tried. I learned how to play vibraphone, 4 mallets. I taught myself how to do that. I bought a book of how to, do harmony, 4 mallets. And I loved I saw Gary Burton in Chick Corea and said, God, crystal silence of that record. That was magnificent. I used to be able, then, when I went to Boston, right? 3 years after studying in Puerto Rico, I went to Boston, and I was in New England Conservatory, don't know how, and I got to see the Boston Symphony for free every Friday afternoon. We got free tickets. I was there all the time. So I saw these guys play all the time. My teachers would be playing every Friday. That was fantastic. And then I could see Billy Cobham. I could see Elvin Jones. I could see Bill Evans. I could so many people, and I could sit right next to them, and it was not expensive for a student back then. $3 to $4, we could afford that. It was okay. You know? And so my world completely changed. Then I started studying outside the conservatory with maybe the greatest drum set teacher in the United States, Mary, Alan Dawson. He was natural genius. As an educator, I thought that his method of education was number one, because you had to read the simple pages that had nothing on them, and you have to imagine the whole thing. So you have to create, and that's called spatial thinking. He had that. He didn't know why it was so powerful. Now, I knew later, when I really got into writing my books, the power of not having things there and imagining them. Imagination is number one. Imagination. So this idea that I saw when I was a little kid, I got to see it again. I went to see this jazz band, and these musicians were playing that thing I saw when I was little. And I knew now, because I knew how to write these things, I knew that there were threes and twos happening at the same time. The piece I started playing, the little intro I played, was that. It's exactly that. I can play that, and I can show you 4 or 5 points of view of the idea right away. From the same pattern, I could see it from 4 or 5 different points of view. How can that be? That's what I saw when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. My brain would go this way or that way. And that's a big change of gravity. You're listening to something this way, or it's that way, or this way, or this way. There's many points of view on this basic idea. And I'll play it again for a second, and we listen to it. See? That's 3 different points of view. Right away, there's more. I don't want to bore you or get into it or confuse you with the idea. But right away, there's all this material there that these people in Boston are not aware of. And if they are, they're not teaching it. I asked Alan Dawson, how do you get 3 from 2 and 2 from 3? And Alan said to me, I don't know what you're talking about. Now really some messages. All right. All right. And so this idea that I heard when I was little, this idea I wrote a notebook while I was going to Europe on my first gig. My second year at the conservatory, I got a gig. I sat in with 𝗟𝗓𝗦𝗘 one day. It's a long story. And he offered me a gig that same day. We played. And a few months later, I was in the fall, it was in September or something like that, I was in Oslo playing a TV show. My first gig was a TV show with 𝗟𝗓𝗦𝗘. And I got to Europe without a passport. I went through 3 airports without a passport. You can't do that to me. It's a long story, which is on Stan Getz' first record, and it's a two-page jacket. I don't know how you call it, but it opens up like that. And the story's right there. They're making fun of me. And Billy, goes to the airport without a passport. How, this is me. So, yeah. I'm in Europe playing with Stan Getz. That notebook that I wrote on that trip had all kinds of exercises of 3s and 2s, that I didn't know how I knew that was going on. I had no idea the relevance of it. I had no clue. So I put that notebook away. A few years later, after being in Boston 4 years, I moved to LA. Because I had been in LA, I did the Johnny Carson show twice with Stan Getz. And I was staying in Redondo Beach, and I saw the beautiful LA. I said, this is where I want to live. I didn't want to go to New York and be in cold weather and snow and this. No. I did it in Boston because I needed to study. But I said, I'm not going to live that way. I come from the beach, from the warmth. This morning I swam an hour. Yesterday I surfed 2 hours. That's a different kind of thing. And beautiful beaches. I moved to LA. I was there for 1 year, no jobs. So it gave me time to do something else. Then all of a sudden, I get a movie date. And in that movie date, I meet Joe Porcaro, rest in peace. Joe Porcaro, this sweet, fantastic musician, amazing personality. Larry Bunker, who was a certified genius. Larry Bunker was in my first session, and Larry and I became very good friends. Years later, when I'm working for Roland Corporation and MIDI started, I'm on that since MIDI started. I was so lucky. That's a whole book, that story. But Larry Bunker came and studied with me because he wanted to know what the whole thing was about. So that's the respect I got from this guy who, is an amazing musician at all levels, and not many people at that level. Not many people. Larry and Joe remain friends for forever, a long time. So I'm grateful to both. I got a lot of work from both. Joe said, next month we're opening a school. Would you like to come and do a workshop? I did. And a few days later, he called me, would you like to do this every week? And I did. I taught 7 to 9 hours a week. The most I ever taught was 9 hours. And in that time, 17 years, I was the 3rd teacher at PIT. So 17 years, I met a lot of people. After 5 years or so of the school having been established, we started getting a lot of students from Europe, and they would bring music. Wow. And so I got hip to Dudu Rose. I got hip to Zakir Hussain. I got hip to Indian classical music. I got hip to all kinds of music who these kids were hip to. Few people from Spain brought back some music that I connected, because when I listened to Paco de Lucia, I listened to that kind of stuff, Carlos Montoya, when I was a little kid. So I connected At this time, I had my rhythmic intellect not completely formed, but kind of formed. So I knew the flamenco music mostly was in 3 beats. Later, I moved to Spain, and the flamenco, and I played with the top flamencos of the time. They don't know that music is in 3. They don't know there isn't anything. They have 12 beats. Hey, that's a long story. I could write a book about that. So I am in LA, and after quite a long time being there, I'm getting tired with this thing, and I want to move to Europe. And I finally ended up moving to Spain, thanks to the students who brought that music and who connected me to my culture, because my name comes from Provincia de Toros, which is, 3.5 hours or so northwest of Madrid. And I ended up playing there at that little square, at that little plaza, where it says Provincia de Toros in the back, and this is my name, Efrain, Toro. So in Spain, after LA, I was in LA 20 years or so. I did a lot of sessions. I had some periods of great work, of awful work, of no work at all, and all that kind of stuff. People that can handle the same thing day in and day out, I feel they're blessed. I can't. See, the surf is different every day. One day it's big, one day it's small, and it's this way. I can deal with that. It's kind of like jazz. Surfing is like jazz in that way, where you have to be in the moment. You have to play the moment. And I grew up doing that. I could do that since I'm little. Since I'm very young, I could play the moment. I think that's Stan gets liked about me. That, I never played with anyone on that level. And when we played, it felt like home. And he noticed that. And he was always very nice to me, even though he was a difficult person to everyone else. To me, he was always nice. Very lucky. I got a few connections and gigs from that gig. That was my first gig in the United States. 1 year in Boston, I had no gigs. After being there 1 year, I got the second year, I toured with Stennis and recorded 1 whole year, came back, and my phone would stop ringing. Then I could play. It's the way it is. So the same thing in LA. I was lucky with Joe and Larry. They recommended me, and all of a sudden I'm working. Working and doing really good stuff. 1 week I get 5 tour offers, and I took the one that paid the most money because I had a little creature on the way, and that was more important. So the music became secondary to the purpose of life. Before that, music was number one. I'd serve but I left the surf to go, lead. Back to and I left the surf to go into music, to study music in Boston. And then I reunited those two things in LA. Okay. And it was heaven for a little while. Then I wanted more. I wanted more culture. LA, LA, great, fantastic. That week, get 5 tour offers. I take a rock and roll gig. I did that for a couple of years. I come back to LA. No one knew who I was. So I pick up the phone and I call number 1. I don't call number 2. I call number 1. I pick up the Union Boy, say, whose number? I ask, wait, I call number 1. I'm so-and-so, you know, this and that, this and that, this and that. The guy said, well, call someone else. So I did. I called someone else. It took me a month to get to that someone else. Yeah. It was Steve Schaefer, who was fantastic to me, a very good friend. So I went to see him at a session. He got me a session right away, and I got a bunch of sessions after that. So I started working with it. And in that period, I got this gig with Roland Corporation. So I was doing that. I did the dance show. I played the first octopad and the first drums. And I knew there was something there that was interesting. What I was playing, what I was doing was not interesting. I went in and talked to Tom Beckman, who's the owner, and he hired me on the spot right away. He liked my thing. He liked my presentation and like what I did at the dance show. He hired me right away, no questions. And so I spent 6 years at Roland and became pretty good with MIDI and technology. We still had we had analog synthesizers still. It was the Junos and then the Super Jupiter, and then digital synth came. Long story. And more instruments. We keep developing more instruments. We came up with ideas, and the programmers and the engineers, mainly in Japan, did their thing, and we get the instruments with our manual. We wrote the manual, and we found out that the instrument could do things that the engineers and we originally didn't know it could be done. But that was so exciting. It was hard to sleep because the technology was so magnificent. So stuff that people are doing today, 35 years later or more, I was doing back then. And we have music to prove it. We would do some amazing things with our limited technology. The MIDI was the hippest thing we had. And we started using click to MIDI in the studios. A long story. And then SMPTE was developed, and that's a whole other story. Keep babbling here. I don't know if you have any questions. Yes, you can show a picture of my first gig. I forgot to do that. That's Stan Getz right there, and that's Mike Richmond in the back. We're in Switzerland. Cool. We're just in the mountains there at Montreux. That's heaven. That place is heaven. Okay. But the only thing that happens there is once a year at the festival. After the festival, the week after the festival, we went there and recorded for a whole week. We would go to the studio, record one tune, take a break for a few hours, come back, and we never played 2 tunes in a row. And then if something was not fresh and clear and not needed to be done, then we'll do it a couple of days later. Stan was very here that way. He knew to record, and when he recorded, it sounded like he just took a shower. Or that you had the best surfing session with his head, or you had, the opening piece, which is focaccia bread, toasted in little pieces with olive oil, and what else? And parsley, yeah. Yeah, there you go. And then those are eggs. I said eggs. It's an unscrambled. I said unscrambled tortilla omelet. Yeah, it's an unscrambled omelet with red onion and a little cayenne, a little curry, and salad. So. The Stangett's idea of recording was magnificent. I learned all this stuff. I tell you a story that about Stan. Stan never taught anyone directly. They were like miles in 𝗟𝗣. They had a way, a very special way to teach. And when they teach you something, they taught you something, it stayed with you right away. It's just magical what they did. I have 18 books. I have failed. I thought that in my first simple book, all the rhythm people would get what I was saying, but it hasn't happened. I hope with this Rhythm Essence project, people will get the idea of moving. I explain a little more. But Stan, I would do a solo, happening solo on this one tune every night, and nobody would applaud. And Stan felt a little sorry for me. So, one day, just before we're going to play that tune, he's about to count the tune, and he takes the saxophone off his mouth, and I'm sitting right next to him. He says, "Tonight, after your solo," says, "let the people know you're finished." Like, simple. Okay, I got it. So I did the solo, right? Also, I go, blah! And so people knew I finished, people started applauding. And so Stan looks at me and laughs, says, "You see, people don't know, people don't understand. People don't know when you're finished, okay? And they don't know what you're doing, People get your emotion, and the emotion you're conveying. You're conveying this emotion, this thing, and then when you do this thing, and then you go, "I'm finished," people go, "Ah!" But when I'm playing, and I do a solo, and then Stan would play, they would not applaud to interrupt the solo, and then and my thing was already done. So it was so funny. So Stan had a way of teaching that way. Yeah, 𝗟𝗣, I started thinking about rhythm this way, okay, when I was at the conservatory. I was 21, 22. I wrote this thing, this whole notebook of, okay, but I didn't know what was happening. So the question is right to the point. It took another 10 years for me, or so, 10 to 12 years to commit to finding out what it is that I wrote and that I had heard when I was little. I was in LA, I was working, and I was with Roland, and I was doing all that stuff just before I moved to Spain. And I wrote some books because the school needed some books. I wanted to teach like Alan, but the school now needed to be formalized. I loved Alan better. No book, just very simple ideas, because I'm not into patterns. I recognize that music is not into a pattern. The pattern is the way, it's like a mantra into the groove. The pattern is the way into the groove, into the wave. I think people miss that completely. Patterns don't make music. If not, drum machines can play music. And people call music to what drum machines play, but it's not music. Music is a human endeavor, which is relating emotions through, color and timings and different prejudice ideas. Every culture has their own idea of what music is, so it's prejudice to that culture. Prejudice in science is not a negative word. Okay, all these words are used in scientific way. They're not prejudice at all. I mean, they're not negative at all. Something has a bias, it means the gravity is pulling it that way. It doesn't mean it has a bias because it's white hair or, you know, Puerto Rican, whatever. These words, these concepts in science are very important because they're not negative. They don't have that connotation. That's when I wrote my first book, I started trying to convey finally what I understood of this idea of 3 and 2. This idea of 3 and 2 is very fundamental because they happen from 1, 1, 2, 3, and they're numbers, you know. How do we play numbers? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're playing these frequencies. We're playing these numbers. And I got that, but I missed the point. People don't want to hear about that. I do. Because I have that from my family of education. I want to know what's going on. But people don't want to know. People just want to dance, you know, and play. I missed that point for many years as an educator, that people just want to do the endeavor. They don't really want to know what they're doing. And still today, and it will prevail, I think, forever. And humans are not interested in knowing anything, they're interested in living. So I happen to be an educator. That's me. That's what I'm doing here today. See, I'm trying to relate that story. Some people that might feel lonely in this world don't know why. And so for many years, I've had those feelings of, you know, I'm not included. You know, or something. I was invited to all the major drum festivals 1 year or 2, and then never again. So I've been over 30 years in the dark with that. No one invites me to any of that because they don't want to know. They just want to play. You know, they want to play a piece of music. They play that. That's a long story, which I can get into it for a second. 𝗟𝗣, and again, that's a great question. I started then when I was 35, 36 years old to question heavily, and I wrote books. I wrote 5 books right away. I wrote a book called For Your Hands Only, which is the Bible of coordination. I started understanding that coordination was the basis of nature. Nature knows how to coordinate all these frequencies. If things are not in some kind of coordination, they don't manifest. If it's chaos, like at the beginning of the universe, it's so hot that it's chaos. Because molecules cannot form. They're atoms. Atoms are bouncing all over the place. Why? Because it's too hot. Okay. What does that have to do with life? We're cooking. If you don't know how to make a sauce, you're nowhere. Sauce is the groove. You know, sauce is the thing. You can make a great, you know, steak. It is dried up. Okay? The juices are gone. Not half it. The juice, the sauce, is the key. The key to whatever. In cooking, those molecules can't be too hot, because when they're too hot, the sauce won't form. So it's a trick to form a sauce for different types of foods. Okay? If you know how to make a sauce, well, I ask people, I mean, you know how to do wasabi, well, not really, well, you can buy wasabi, you don't have to make it. To buy wasabi, right? And then when you go to a restaurant, Japanese restaurant, they make sushi and they give you wasabi to complement the fish. You know how to make wasabi. I found out that most people don't know how to do it. And it's very interesting. Making wasabi is making a paste out of a paste already. So you have the paste and you have the soy sauce, and you just put a couple of drops, mix it, and you go a drop at a time until you have the consistency of the paste. Once that is done, then you can keep adding stuff like that and you won't change the consistency because you have a sauce. That's the key. Groove is the same thing. Okay? You just do the thing, right? And you add little things, little by little, if they can take it. You add too many things too fast, chaos. So to play the groove, you gotta concentrate on this. The highest level of groove playing is playing music without a pattern. It's playing music in. Let's see. Who's the big musician you think that clear this concept? So you take this talking about groove. Okay. When you take this idea of playing something to the basic idea and getting into the wave of that moment, and then let that carry you. And if it can take some more, you put some more. But if you put too much, again, you'll fall apart. There's a way of playing music in jazz that is playing a groove without playing a pattern. I believe that to be the highest expression of playing music, where you can generate consistency. Doesn't mean perfect, it means some kind of consistent idea. Like the rotation of the earth is consistent. See, as the earth has a groove. It is my science of nature. It's a groove, but it's not perfect. It's very imperfect, but it doesn't disturb the groove. See, so when you're playing music, groove, it's not perfect. Perfect, it doesn't groove. It has to be imperfect. Okay? And those imperfections are part of a style. There are performers that can play a groove without playing a pattern, a repeating pattern. And I call attention to that because that's the highest level, I believe. To repeat something, just repeat something and get into a groove, it's hard enough, but it's what it is. Okay. You just do that. Okay. Now, I'm just repeating that pattern and grooving. I can groove in that pattern. If you keep that groove without playing that pattern, is what I'm talking about. There are people who can do that. Let's see if there's any questions for me. I see this. Thanks, Jorge. Okay. Do I want to talk about the cajon now in a second? I'm almost getting to the end of this idea of my formation and where my ideas come from, where my groove, idea of music, idea of rhythm, this whole thing. So since little I can move to a groove because I can dance. I can dance, I can move to a groove. So I'm now rationalizing what a groove is today. Why? Because I come from that mind. Most people are not interested. It's okay. But for the people that are interested, I talk. Well, I need to. It's my thing. It's my dharma. It's my calling is to convey these ideas that I have questioned. Why? No one knows. If you're a teacher, you're a teacher. You're a lover, you're a lover. You're a hater, you're a hater. You do what you do. It takes us a long time sometimes to realize and to be at peace with what we really are and what we do naturally. So I'm naturally an educator, but I'm not a natural musician. I can dance, I can move to musical sound. But I'm not a natural musician. Like I know natural musicians that can, they can do some amazing stuff. So I am a studied musician, but I am an engineer by nature. I question. I want to know. I want to put these things together. I want to be able to explain them and see. So I figured this out. Some character a few years ago said, "You think you're the only one, or you're the one that discovered 3 and 2. Well, no, in the Western world, Baroque music and Renaissance music, had all this idea of the Hemiola effect. They had so much music in period 2, it's mind-boggling. But there's no method written about it. I have 18 books written about that, okay? And 3 specifically about the phenomenon of rhythm. So I did invent rhythm. Whoever invented nature invented rhythm. Rhythm is the basis of nature. Rhythm is at the core of nature. And rhythm is coordinated frequencies. 1, 2, 3. What I'm playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of that. Harmonic structures. That's all I've played. And I've given you 3 points of view of it. There's more. And it's for you to discover. My books, my materials can be gotten, at rhythmline.net. It's my website. Right? And my email, rhythmmline@yahoo.com. And that's my website here. I decided to give this a break for a while. And I have done that. At various times in my life, I stopped. Stopped listening to music, I stopped playing, mostly. I still did a few things. When I was in Puerto Rico, I served for 5 years, and I did some monumental projects. I did a record for Jose Lugo, rest in peace. Maybe of his time, the greatest producer, composer, and arranger of Afro-Caribbean music and pop music. The guy was amazing. I played some drum set and percussion on some of his records that won multiple Grammys. But he did a big band record for him, 20 musicians, 𝗟𝗩𝗦. It's such a beautiful record. It's one of the nicest Afro-Caribbean music records ever recorded. I'm very proud of it. proud of that. But I did that when I was not active at all. Okay. So from time to time I take breaks, and I can, because I'm not a musician. You see, I can live from cooking and surfing and riding my bikes, and that fills me up. Music alone doesn't fill me up. So that's why I know I'm not a musician. I don't need music to live. Okay. But I love music, and when I play music, I play it at the highest level I can. And that level seems to be, universal. I'm lucky that way. I can play, I can move to any place in the world, and I can work because I'm at that level, and I keep at that level. Well, okay. Just checking to see if there's any questions. I'm going to get into this idea for a second, and I'm going to focus the camera on what I'm doing, okay, so you get an idea. I'm playing my new cajon, of course, the 𝗘𝗙𝗥𝗢 cajon, who is, is a one of a kind, which it gets us to the next topic, which is where the cajon came from. Okay, and I'm going to play something. I'm playing a waltz, and that could be that waltz could be could be from many different countries. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1. Okay. The basis when I'm playing is exactly what I started playing, and what I've played until now. But now I'm playing a pattern from that basis. Okay, the basis. That's the basis. That's just pure frequency. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See, I gave you another point of view. That's 4 points of view of the same thing already. Okay. So this pattern, see, it's the same tempo and everything, but it doesn't sound like the first pattern, but it is, you see. So educationally, this is very important because if you notice what the basis is, and you can see the pattern, but most people just see the pattern, just the pattern. And from the pattern, you're limited. You're very limited because you have no basis. Okay, the basis, okay? The basis is what's behind. The basis is what's behind. What you can't notice, what you can't see. Only when you study, you get to see that. And because I have that kind of mind, I discover that. I can see it. And that's rhythm. Rhythm is not the pattern. The pattern is a pattern. Okay? There's only one pattern of rhythm in the universe and that we know, which is the one that we have on Earth. And this pattern is of harmonics. It's one frequency that gives 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's whole numbers. You see? And the relationship between these frequencies, it's interesting. Because you can take any of the frequencies out of context and make a relationship. Like 4 and 3, 3 and 4, 2 and 3, 3 and you see. You're making those relationships. They do not exist. Without 1, there's no 2 and 3 and 4, there's nothing. And 1 is not just 1. 1 is 1. 1. See, and 1 is a downbeat and an upbeat. It's not. Wow. It's not that. So this is a conception of, pulsation that we have in the Western world that is like this one-dimensional idea. And this one-dimensional idea comes from India. That's a whole book in itself. It's a whole story. The cajon, which we started talking about, is an instrument that comes from, or is developed from this African culture trying to express themselves on anything they can. I remember when I was little, the Coca-Cola bottles would come on this crates, small crates of 16 bottles or something like that. And we used to, not only we in Puerto Rico, but in the Caribbean where we used to play. And that sounded like a cajon with strings. I remember when I was little, we used to do that. The first encounter I had with a cajon was in 1996 in Spain. I bought a cajon at 𝗟𝗪𝗘𝗦, this fantastic store in Plaza Mayor in Madrid. And I became friends with two brothers who owned the place. I used to buy so many CDs there every week. I was so into flamenco, crazy. In that cajon I brought to LA, nothing was done. Nothing was done with those instruments. I just had it. And I moved to Spain right after that. But in '96 I finally moved out of LA and I went to Spain. And I had a really great time for a couple years, 2, 3, 4 years. Then it was too much for me. And I don't smoke, I don't drink, and that culture is, I'm in a room with 17 flamencos and the smoke is like, you go to a club and you can't see the people next to you. Little by little, this thing started worrying on me. It just didn't work out. But the cajon, I kept with it. And I started developing. The first time I saw a cajon was in Peru, a long story. And I saw a black player from the Campos family, and I saw an Asian player, Gino Gamboa, who played the cajon, the Peruvian cajon, like castanets, because he can play castanets. And so my technique comes from those two ideas. I can play congas, I can't play much castanets. I bought it, I've tried, but I've never spent enough time on it. That's such an amazing thing. It's not easy to play either. My technique in my development of this idea, of this instrument of the cajon, that's that kind of stuff. That's that kind of idea. Those are techniques that we learn from all instruments to get you to play, to perform a certain sound. I designed, with the help of Josh Trask at LP, this and Akbar and others, this idea of cajon that has more qualities than just the regular boom ba idea. The cajon is an instrument; it's not a drum set. You can use it as a drum set, but you can use anything as a drum set. Cajon, you can do anything as a cajon. It's a Coca-Cola bottle crate. This cajon has 3 sounds and it has qualities. It has this body that lets you play. It's sensitive. You don't have to hit it so hard to get a sound. You can You can use all kinds of ideas, all kinds of techniques, from conga technique to tabla technique, and frame drum technique, and all kinds of stuff. That's my development of these things I saw. In Peru, please show fingers. Yeah, I will. They're here. Let's concentrate on this for a second. This is tabla technique. It's very elusive, so I'll detail it for you. Okay, it's not in the fingers. It's not here. It's here. So it's tough. It's not easy to do. It takes a while. You have to be very patient with it. Okay, so it looks to be this kind of stuff, but it's not. It's this. It's here. I'm exaggerating that. That's why. See, it's right here. That's a triplet. Okay, that's what that is. Is that okay? You can develop this in many ways, in a linear way or a harmonic way. Linear way, harmonic way. Okay. Harmonic way, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Linear, 60 notes go this way, or triplets this way. Okay. And in a linear way, over the bar, what's on the one changes, but harmonic, it's always the same. So if this is of the beat, on the beat, on the beat. So that's 3 ways of doing the same thing. Okay, so I can have the melody going here. So I'm doing tap, 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 and the melody's here. So, okay, I can do the melody here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3. And now, yeah. So this technique is 3 different possibilities, and depending on how you subdivide the thing, it could be 6 possibilities or 9 possibilities. Yeah. Long story. I hope this makes sense. Okay. So another thing. Okay, alternating. Same idea. Alternating. That's become very popular, but that's a technique that tabla players have developed. I've never seen anyone but tabla players play the developed form of that. Let's see. See, I'm going and playing in between with the other hand, and it creates this thing, but it has melody. It's not just a roll. Now it's got 𝗟𝗙𝗥𝗢 in a roll form. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm going da 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 da. See, da 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 da, and in between with the other hand. That's tabla technique. Okay, and that's not just rolls. Those are rolls with melody, And I can give you a whole book on that, on those possibilities. It's unbelievable. Okay? So this instrument, you can do that, and you can get it can get loud because the instrument has range, a big range. The first instruments were pretty raw, and I remember talking to not too long ago to 𝗟𝗣 about that. He's Peruvian. Saying, the first instruments are so hard to play. You have to hit them like a conga in order for them to sound. Yeah, So I have history with the cajon. Okay, the history is that I brought a cajon from Spain, who became, the norm of how they make cajones in Peru now. I was lucky to bring it in, or unlucky, for the Spaniards. I brought this cajon from Spain, from Manuel Soler. Manuel Soler was a dancer with Paco Lucia when Paco bought the first cajon from the icon 𝗟𝗩𝗘 Soto in Peru. And 𝗟𝗩𝗘 is earth. It's Father Earth. When this guy plays, it's like, yes, everything is good. Everything is okay. The same thing with Manuel Soler. When he played, the earth moved. And he was a dancer. But he played cajon naturally. And he could play, because he was a dancer, he could do like a double bass thing. Okay, flamenco, and play. But there's no recordings of him. I saw him doing that. Okay. So Manuel Soler designed this cajon that was bigger than all the cajones available. And I got one from the factory, long story. Who made the instrument was a lady, and she became ill. And they had to sell the factory to someone else. But they made 3 cajones for me, special for me. They were beautiful. And so this is a step up from that. Those are my first really kind of almost what I wanted. They had it. Manuel Soler was right onto it. The instrument was bigger, and it had a beautiful bass, and you didn't need to hit it super hard to play, and it was very nice. The difference is this has different woods, different colors, and this is more sensitive even than that one. Because we have different technologies, we've developed different technologies. But that cajon was brought to Peru, and they copied. Alexis, rest in peace. Alexis copied this. It's cool. He saw the value, like he copied it right away. And so the standard cajon, and then Akbar made something bigger like that. But Alexis did copy that cajon exactly. And other companies have copied it, other artists have copied it. They don't know where the idea comes from. They don't need to know. But I'm telling you, and that is the truth. The cajon in Peru was not like that until that cajon that I brought, that was designed by Manuel Soler and made by Duende Percussion, the original. That company is not the original. The lady who used to make the cajon is not there anymore, or the original people. Okay. The cajon has become the most popular instrument or percussion instrument in the planet, and with reason. It's a simple idea, but there's more to it than what people play. Let's concentrate on that for a second again. So, I need to tune that. I have it very sensitive, so that, see, so I'm going to tune this thing for a second. And very sensitive, I'm going to apply a little force, because I play usually much softer than I'm playing right now. There you go. So, yeah, playing with my tips. I'm playing 12s, right? Playing 18s. Sorry, I'm playing 12s, I'm playing 18s. In flamenco, the guitar player plays at that level a lot. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That doesn't happen in Afro-Peruvian music, but it happens in flamenco music. And that frequency is used a lot. Those are nines doubled, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, So this is, again, this is me. This is this scientific mind. There's a shredding things apart, getting the possibilities. All those things are in my books. All these ideas. I'm working with the bases. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The 3 different styles of waltzes. Okay. Jazz waltz, another style. Nine. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. Linear 9. Mountain or African. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm playing with my fingers. Linear. Those are groups of 5s and 9s. That's a different level. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 1. And on, right? variations of 2s and 3s together, different styles of music. And this is a newer type of cajon technique, which as soon as some things become possible, as soon as this becomes possible, for me to be able to record this thing, you will have materials of a new way of playing the instrument, and the instrument becomes a voice for all kinds of expression, not this just boom, black. This thing is not too interesting. So if there's no questions and everything is cool, I'd like to welcome you into my kitchen, okay? And thank you for the opportunity to disturb your wave. Hopefully, you will find some sympathetic ideas that you can grab onto. You can reach me at any time on my website or RHYTHMMLINE, RHYTHMMLINE and my yahoo.com. For any of my materials, or just to say hi, or just to talk, or to ask me anything. Okay, so I'm cool with that. I can deal with that. I have no pressing issues at the moment. The surf is kind of small, so I'm here a lot. Hey, Gordon. It's my pleasure. And so, next chapter says September 3rd, Damon Grant. And you can find all this stuff on the website. You can post that. There you go. That's where you find all this presentation, including this one today. So thank you again. Hey, Hyman. Thank you. All right. Any questions before we go? Please, I'm here. Otherwise, again, don't hesitate to ask. Gracias a ti, Anastasios. Right. Beautiful. Okay. So we wrap this up. Abrazos de Puerto Rico.